Every moment of every day, I have to justify my existence. I have to be this person that the world says deserves to live, not be over incarcerated, not be over policed. I have to justify my existence, and that is so stressful. And that is the lived experience of Black folks here.
Hi there. Welcome to Students of Mind, the mental health podcast made by curious minds for curious minds. On this podcast, we, the hosts, are just like you, eager to learn more about the mind. Here we learn with you and provide you with clear, concise information backed up by real experts about all things mental health. My name is Jade.
And my name is Amina, Jade's mom.
Today's episode is the beginning of a series of discussions about Black mental health. Joining us for our first discussion is psychologist and activist Dr. Tyffani Dent. So today's guest is Dr. Tyffani Mondford Dent. She is a licensed psychologist who provides mental health consultations and assessments through her practice, Mondford Dent Consulting and Psychological Services. Dr. Dent is co-founder of Centering Sisters LLC, an organization that focuses on supporting Black women, girls, and femmes. Dr. Dent's primary areas of focus are sexual violence prevention and intervention, the role of intersectionality in the lives of Black and brown girls and women, and working at the intersection of mental health and social justice. She has made appearances on local and national news programs addressing the importance of emotional wellness in Black communities, mental health in times of national crisis, and the school-to-prison pipeline's impact on Black girls. Welcome, Dr. Dent, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we get into the questions, I know I said a little bit about the work you do, but can you tell us a little more about yourself and the work that you do?
Well, I am unapologetically Black and female, and I center the needs of Black folks in the work that I do. I have found and I push this narrative that I'm a Black psychologist for the culture, that we need more Black mental health professionals supporting our Black community, and that there is not a way for us as Black folks in mental health to not look at that intersection of race and gender and sexual orientation as it relates to our community and the traumas that we experience being Black in America. So I say every Black psychologist, Black therapist needs to be and own that we are Black therapists for the culture. So that is me.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Dr. Dent, for your time today and for the important work that you do. This discussion is tragically appropriate in light of the past 3 weeks of protesting, Rayshard Brooks's death on June 12th, George Floyd's death on May 25th, and the hundreds of others, African Americans, that have been lost to police violence. With all of that said, do you have any reflections to share?
I think the first thing is I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm frustrated. I'm angry. I am everything that many Black folks are at this point in time. I think because this is not new to us. It's amplified in this moment for the rest of the world. So we're kind of inundated with it. It's hitting us from all sides, from people who want to claim allyship with us and are saying, hey, I didn't know that this stuff happens, even though we've likely been having conversations with them about it, but they kind of blow it off or minimize it in some form. We can't get away from it. And I think as a mental health professional, the difficult thing is that I'm trained to deal with this. I'm trained to deal with trauma and stress. And if I'm angry, if I'm filled with rage and helplessness and exhausted, frustrated, irritated, all of the words that you can think of, I hurt for my community because I'm struggling and I should know how to manage it. So for those who don't do this on a daily basis, it's hurtful. And I'm trying to figure out how our community continues to have to exist in a world that does not value us. And this just kind of reminds us. Someone posted, we've been ringing this alarm for 400 years. You just chose to not listen to it before. And I think that that's My take on it in this moment is our community has been through so much. This is not new for us. And how is it that we're expected to continue to survive it and not have it impact us?
Yeah, I think one thing for me is just how you were kind of saying, like, this has been going on for 400 years, and now it seems like people are just starting to care. And I think that's why it's important for us to kind of like step back and talk about how Black mental health in general is different from the mental and emotional health of the rest of society in general. So if you could explain like the difference between Black mental health and then the mental health of everyone else, that would be great.
I think one of the things is that we experience some of the same mental health issues as other communities. We experience depression, we experience anxiety at high levels. We don't seek services for it. Our community has this belief that you just push through it. We push this narrative of resilience and strength that is toxic and emotionally harmful, which makes us say that even if I'm experiencing all of the psychological distress, that I just need to figure it out for myself. And I think that that's damaging to our community. We often are more likely to report what people call psychosomatic complaints, which means we take this anxiety and depression and we explain it away in terms of body symptoms. So we're going to end up seeing our primary care physicians talk about my body aches and I have headaches and my stomach hurts and I can't sleep. And so we explain it away as physical symptoms, and then we don't receive services. I think we also have this added trauma. There's this concept of called epigenetics that talks about that you carry trauma in your DNA. And it was a while ago that they started talking about it related to the descendants of Holocaust survivors, that they were finding that within their actual DNA that they were carrying a high level of stress, even though they were not actually in the Holocaust. It was something that they were starting to figure out was being passed down. And so if we're talking about a 10-year history of trauma, and then we talk about a 400-year history of trauma, we're carrying this stress in our bodies. And there's not a point in time where we've had a length of time where anybody is saying that we're justified in this trauma reaction. Instead, we're told that was your ancestors. And to me, I'm like, no, that was my daddy. Because it wasn't my ancestors. This is my straight up daddy who was living during these Jim Crow times. And so we're constantly, our experiences are being negated. Our trauma is being told that we should just get over it. And that doesn't really happen within other communities. I think we also have defined in our community where we can receive services, and services are not mental health, that we need to do something else. The Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Minority Health, said we are 10% more likely to report experiencing psychological distress than white people. We also do not go and receive services at the level that makes sense based upon the amount of distress that we're experiencing. And then also 10% of Black women say they feel everything is an effort to do. And 6% of white women say the same thing. So we're experiencing these things. We're just refusing to acknowledge them or to seek support for them. And that's been consistent.
So do you think the way that Black people manage their mental health has changed much over time, or you think it's been relatively the same?
I've been a psychologist for about 20 years. It's been relatively the same. I think we are beginning to have more conversations and acknowledge some of our vulnerabilities. In this moment, I know I've been communing with some Black therapists around the country, and we have been having more people in this moment who have been reaching out around the stress of what's happening. But before it, for me, people came to me if they were ordered by somebody to the court, child protective services, that some system was involved to make it happen. Some of our churches are just now getting on board and saying that mental health treatment is important. Before it was come to the pastor for pastoral counseling. And I'm like, your one pastoral class ain't the same as my 10 years and internships. But they're starting to become a little bit of a shift depending upon which denominations you look at in terms of being open about mental health services. I know that the church that my family goes to, the pastor is very open about the importance of mental health and accessing services. I think this current generation, this 19 through 30-year-old group, is also becoming a little bit more open about their stress and their trauma, and saying that we need something more than what we've been getting, and they're demanding that they deserve to be emotionally healthy. So I do think we're seeing a shift, not necessarily in my generation or above me, but in those who are below us. They are starting to kind of acknowledge that it's just like taking care of your physical health, and that you sometimes need an expert to make that happen. So I'm excited to begin to see that shift. And I see that more so in middle class socioeconomic status and upper middle class than I still see in those who are lower income. So there's still work to be done.
Okay, and could you provide a few more statistics just about, like the most common mental illnesses amongst Black people, and then any other like general statistics you have about the state of mental health in the Black community?
Okay. Black folks, adults, are more likely to report sadness, hopelessness, and worthlessness than adult white folks. 18.6% of white people receive mental health services compared to less than 9% of Black people. When it comes to specific diagnoses, the gap narrows when we're talking about depression, but more than 68% of white people who report depression receive services, and about 61% of us do. So no one's receiving it to the extent they should, but we're still a little bit lower. According to the NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 30% of Black adults with mental illness receive services each year, compared to 43% of all other people in the United States. And so there is this ongoing issue, specifically with depression and anxiety within our community. Those are the things that we seem to experience the most, which is common as relates to overall mental health presentation.
And as you talk about these statistics and the fact that we don't tend to get treatment, what are your thoughts on the Black church and how it either helps or does not help the situation?
I will preface this by saying my grandfather was a deacon. My grandmother was a missionary. My brother is a pastor, and I have two other brothers who are ministers. So I'll preface it with that.
Right.
And they know this, the church has a lot of work to do. And I think that there has been this push historically that you just have to have stronger faith, that mental health is just a faith issue versus being a truly mental health, emotional wellness issue. And that there is this narrative that just pray more, just increase your faith, go to your pastor. And I have been pushing more of the narrative of, if we look at it like physical health, if you break your leg, your pastor is going to pray with you before surgery, but he's still going to send you in there to the surgeon. And we have to begin to look at mental health in that same way. Again, I've had some great experiences with pastors in the sense, and with churches, but those experiences also can't be viewed as representative, because if you invite me in, you already have a more open mind about mental health. It's those who don't. I've had phone calls not returned. I specifically developed a faith-based support group for Black women sexual abuse survivors. I had pastors stand me up who said they were going to meet with me. Phone calls not returned. So, and this ongoing narrative about it's a demon. Mental health is a demon. And so battling some of that within some of the more traditional churches and denominations is exhausting. And it's sad and unfair to the members of its congregations who really are suffering and are not getting the support they need. But again, there's some denominations. I know I am a part of the United Church Christ, which is a very progressive denomination. They're fully open around mental health. And then there was some of the more traditional denominations and churches, specifically I find with pastors who are not necessarily seminary trained, but who are just called, are a little bit less open to having mental health professionals come in. They're more likely to do the "it's a demon, you just don't have faith" conversations when their congregation members are suffering.
Well, it almost seems like a bleak situation for our mental health.
I don't think, I think it's better than it was, but I think we're coming from a place of we didn't seek services at all. Um,
Right.
there's understandable reasons why we didn't, because the people didn't look nothing like us and didn't really understand where we were coming from. And our communities were very silent about mental health. So I think we're getting better. I mean, I think even the fact that we're having this conversation,
Right.
the fact that there are Black therapists and Black therapist organizations, and on a weekly basis, I have people reaching out to me asking me to connect them to services throughout the country, shows that we are moving in the right direction. We're just coming from a place of nothing and weariness about it and denial of it. So to even begin to say we are stressing and we are struggling is major for our community.
Yeah, and even I can attest to that. I feel like, I'm only 20, but I've seen changes in the past like 5-10 years, in terms of how open Black people are about mental health. Like, I watched a video the other day of a Black male pastor who, during service one Sunday, talked about his experience with anxiety and talked about how he started seeing a therapist. And that was like amazing to me, because you don't see a pastor talking about that, let alone like a Black man talking about his anxiety. So that was really significant to me. So I think there's, even in my short lifetime so far, there's been like noticeable changes
Absolutely.
and improvements.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you find that when we do finally seek treatment, are we looking for Black mental health professionals and therapists and psychiatrists, or do we just take what we can find that's mostly available?
I think that we look for us. Finding us is not that easy. I purposely have chosen to I work in residential treatment with boys. And I also, until our outpatient agency closed, I did community-based therapy. I was the clinical director, but I also went out and saw kids in their homes and their schools. I was meeting with their parents in lower income communities. So part of the struggle is there's still not many of us to meet the need, and where we choose to practice. I know some who they're psychologists and therapists, but they work in college counseling centers and are professors, or they primarily work with people with private insurance. And so we have this whole part of our community that does not have access. And then we also have a tendency to kind of migrate to Black supportive communities. So, like, my hometown is small. I'm not going to live there. I mean, first of all, it's racist as all get out.
Right.
But, and I'm like, I'm not going to raise my children there. So I'm here in Cleveland, and there's many of us here, still not enough to meet the need because of where we're choosing to practice. But in my hometown, there's none. So there are places that in cities where Black folks don't have access to us. I usually find that we are seeking us. Unfortunately, a lot of times what we get, specifically if we don't have private insurance, is we get the white girl who just graduated last week who is, this is her first job. She's just trying to get her feet wet. She really doesn't know anything. And we're coming in with complex trauma and issues that we finally are willing to address. And the turnover is high and you don't really know what you're doing. Like, you deserve the most experienced person who is the most culturally competent and humble to provide you services, and that's not what you get. So sometimes we end up never going back because it's horrible. I've spent so many sessions at the beginning having to process with clients horrible previous therapy experiences and acknowledging it, apologizing for it, and glad that they come back. And so I sometimes say, it's like a hairdresser. The first time you got your hair done, the person might have done a horrible job. You might not go back to them, but you found somebody to do your hair. So I need to value your mental health as much as you value your braids. And it's okay. So yeah, we seek it. We look for us. We're not easy to find because of where we're located, because of the types of insurance we take, the types of clients we take. And so it's really, really difficult. And so I'm so excited about you and all of your, classmates who are going to be psychologists, because we need you. Like, I'm constantly like, every time I'm like, we need y'all so bad, because there's just not enough of us. There's just not.
Is there support in the professional community for Black therapists?
There's some organizations that are specific to Black therapists. I know the National Association of Social Work has a National Association of Black Social Workers. For therapists, there's the Association of Black Psychologists. Then we also seem to develop our own networks. Like, I reached out on Facebook and did a Zoom and said, where are my Black therapists? Because we struggle and we need to check in. And there were like 17 of us. We got on a Zoom call. We're adding other ones of us to just connect across the country, across disciplines, because not everybody is a psychologist or a counselor. So we've been doing that connection as well. But those are two of the major actual national organizations. Everybody doesn't belong to them. So that kind of makes it difficult as well. But we end up trying either through grad schools to connect. Some of us have been on a mission to mentor people who are coming into the field. Like, I got you, check in with me. This, we need you. How can I help you with internships and projects and dissertations and stuff like that? There's informal ones on Facebook. There's a Black Girls Clinician Collective, Black Therapist Rock. So social media has allowed us a easier way to connect with each other. And also, every Black therapist ain't great either. So it also allows us to be able to kind of say, I'm just not going to refer anybody to you because I'm thinking that, but it's allowed those connections in us to be able to better identify and support each other. So
that's important.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. So just pivoting slightly. So how would you explain to the listeners how systemic and systematic racism actually impacts our mental health?
Okay. I think first we need to look at what is systemic racism. Systemic racism is just like this whole inherent bias and prejudices that are kind of woven into the fabric of this country. So those things such as policies and practices, disenfranchising us in voting, gentrification, redlining, not having access to, because of the places where we live, those places being over-policed and surveilled. So like the system being set up overall to make it difficult for Black folks. So then it impacts where we live, the jobs we're able to have access to. It shows up in our access to wealth because people talk about generational wealth and we don't have it. Our housing, whether or not healthcare facilities are built in our communities, grocery stores in our communities, all of those things, that this just overall system that makes it harder for us to survive. We see some of that in COVID-19 when people have talked about, well, Black folks are disproportionately impacted by it. And they say, see, it's because of your diet. And it's like, okay, well, let's look at how there's no grocery stores in our area. Let's look
Right.
at how we've been pushed into very close quarters in terms of where we can live, so we can't social distance. Let's look at, because we don't necessarily have generational wealth, and we're often put into jobs that we're essential workers, but that they're not the higher paid ones, that impacts who we're coming into contact with, and that this is not this moment. And if we're having more health issues, it's because we don't have access to primary health care, appropriate foods, things like that, that kind of are underlying that were there before. And so on a daily basis, we're existing in this system. And then we have the systematic, where these individual things that can happen that are supported by systemic racism. One of my friends was talking about how systemic racism allows a person who is not from the Black community to have access to grants and funds that allow them to build stores in our community. That we are not permitted to have access to. Systematic is allowing them to treat us like crap when we go into their store, because society is going to support you treating us as less than human beings. And how is it that you're in your own community where you live and people feel justified in treating you like crap? Systemic is how our school systems are set up, where we are, again, not receiving the funding in our schools that best support the needs of our Black students. And when desegregation happened, one of the things that got pushed out was Black teachers. And so in some of these school districts, we're also dealing with people who don't look like us, who don't like us. And they're able to say stuff like, oh, one of y'all, how many of y'all gonna be baby mamas before you get out of the 9th grade? And then the system supports them in being able to say stuff like that to us. And so we exist in this space where overall society has determined that we are less than, and that we deserve to be treated as less than. And when we challenge those systems, there's justification for why we're being treated like that. I mean, we're in this moment now where, as Black people, I was saying one day on social media, we're like one of the only people who have to prove that we deserve to live. Like when police kill other people, they have to justify killing them and that they deserve to die. We have to, when we're killed, have to explain how great we were and have an exemplary record and never have done anything. And we have to have our white coworkers standing up and saying that they were awesome. And we have to show pictures of us in suits. And, all of these things to humanize us, to make it so we are able to say this person deserves to live. How is that affecting your emotional health? It's traumatic. It's exhausting. It's stressful. It explains anxiety, because in every moment of every day, I have to justify my existence. I have to be this person that the world says deserves to live, not be over incarcerated, not be over policed, not experience microaggressions. I have to justify my existence, and that is so stressful. And that is the lived experience of Black folks here, not just in the US. So,
Right.
but it's our existence. And it has been our existence for 400 years at a minimum.
Yeah. And the average person does not have this language to use.
Mm-hmm.
We have all these feelings and experiences, but we may not be able to name it for what it is, but that stress that it causes is still there.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Students of Mind. What you just listened to was the first part of a wonderful discussion my mom and I had with Dr. Tyffani Dent. Please be sure to follow Dr. Dent on Instagram and Twitter, which I will have listed in the description of this episode, and also check the description of the episode for links to resources mentioned by Dr. Dent. Come back next week to listen to the second part of our discussion with Dr. Dent.